Hello, friends, family, strangers of the internet. Welcome to what you did not ask for, a video of me telling you the top 10 books that I read in 2021. Before I start the list, I just wanted to say that of these 10 books, 7 of them were on audio, and that's pretty comparative to my reading year in total. I think I read about 71% on audio and the rest as physical books. I'd like to do better in the coming year in terms of reading a little bit more in print, but that's just where I was at for this past year. And I read a ton of great books, whether I read them in print or whether I listened to them while I was doing other stuff. So I'm excited to tell you about them. Let's get started. So coming in at number 10, we have a reread, which I debated whether I should include rereads on this list because there are a couple, but I just decided, you know, if a book is good enough to reread, like, it probably is going to be one of the top contenders. So book number 10 at the bottom of the list is The Hobbit by, who wrote this? Oh yeah, J.R.R. Tolkien. Obviously a classic of the fantasy genre, children's literature, all that. This was like, I think my 4th time reading it, and it was a delight, as always. The reason it's kind of at the bottom of the list is not necessarily that like every book that's above it is actually a better book than The Hobbit. That may or may not be the case, but most of the other books that are on the list are books that I read for the first time, and so there's just something, you know, exciting about that newer reading experience. So all that said, I read this last February. It was just like so cozy to do that, and it really needs no introduction. It's a quest story. It's fun. It's funny. The reason that I reread it was because there's going to be some other Tolkien on this list, and I wanted to start at the start of the story. So that's The Hobbit, number 10 on the list. So coming in at number 9 on the list is the first audiobook, which is Who is Maude Dixon by Alexandra Andrews. This book is a wild ride. You should know, if you're not into bad language, there's plenty of cursing and some sexual content, but nothing explicit. This is the twistiest thriller that I've probably ever read. It is really good, really propulsive. You think you know what kind of the general thing is, and then you just like keep getting just like slammed with like new twists. So it's really great. It starts out following a protagonist who is working at a publishing company at a low level. She really wants to be an author. That's like her main goal in life, which I'm a sucker for. That kind of story, any kind of aspiring writer story, is an overdone trope, but I love it. And then this character gets an offer, a really strange kind of offer, to be a personal assistant to this legendary author who's very, very private, named Maude Dixon. And so she kind of has to go off the grid for this job, but she accepts it because she's sure that she can like learn a ton working for this author. And then the whole situation is not at all what she expects it to be, and it gets crazy. And I loved it. This is one that everybody's been talking about in like the book world, and for very good reason. So that's Who is Maude Dixon by Alexandra Andrews. Number 8 on the list is Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson. This book came out in 2019, and another one that I've heard about lots of places, but I just didn't get around to, wasn't sure if I was going to be into it, and this one was just like really surprising to me that I liked it as much as I did. Basically, it follows a main character named Lillian, who to me is just like the female version of a character that Pete Davidson would play in a movie. She's kind of a stoner, she swears a lot, her life is just kind of a mess. She's working at a job she doesn't really care about, I think maybe at a grocery store or something, and she ends up getting a call from an old friend from school who has done very well for herself, married, really rich, and has a couple of stepchildren that she's looking for a nanny for, and that's why she's calling Lillian. The only problem is that these children spontaneously combust frequently. which is just like a great premise. The children themselves are not hurt, but they catch fire. And the problem with this is that their father is a prominent politician, and the family is trying to keep this on the down low because he is up to kind of move up in the ranks in the American political system. And I just, again, there's a lot of language here, but it's genuinely very funny and also very moving. Like, the relationship that Lillian develops with the children is really sweet, and I just really enjoyed it. I listened to it very quickly and just couldn't get enough. It was just a really nice story, but like also interesting in terms of, you know, themes like privacy and, you know, public life, being a public figure, and it's like interpersonal connection. Anyway, it was really great. Very much enjoyed Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson this year. Number 7 on the list is from The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basile E. Frankweiler by E.L. Königsberg. This was published in 1967, and I think I remember seeing this book when I was a kid. I don't personally remember reading it, but I feel like it's very much a classic of the middle grade genre, especially in terms of more realistic fiction. It's of course debatably not that realistic, but a lot of middle grade fiction is that way because it's about kids being independent, and that's kind of like the point of it. This was just like such a lovely, charming book. And I listened to it after I had been listening to some other things that were much grittier and more adult, and this was just such a refreshing thing to read, and genuinely just like such a good and entertaining story. It follows Claudia and her younger brother Jamie, who of her 3 younger brothers, Claudia chooses to take with her when she decides to run away from home. But Claudia does not like the outdoors. She does not like discomfort. She likes the finer things in life. So she decides to run away to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And so the book just follows her and Jamie's adventures as they go on this little escapade, and Claudia and Jamie are just so funny and have such like genuine, distinct personalities that it just makes the book really fun. You can just kind of imagine like the kind of people that they're going to grow up to be. If you're looking for something just really wholesome, maybe a little nostalgic to read, definitely recommend From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basile E. Frankweiler. It'll be a very quick read and well worth your time, I think. Book number 6 on my list is Persestroika in Paris by Jane Smiley. This book is not at all what you would think from the title, though if you look at the cover, you'll get a much better idea. Persestroika is the name of a horse, a racehorse. They call her Paras for short throughout the book. Someone leaves her stall door open after a race, and she just wanders out because she's a very curious filly. She just starts wandering the streets of Paris, and she meets other animals, a dog, some ducks. Ducks are so funny to me, and they really contributed to the book for me. An old raven, I believe he is, and some rats, and a little boy who lives with his very old grandmother, or great-grandmother, I think. This is just like another very charming and wholesome book. I'm not really like an animal person per se myself, but I do really like books that put you like in the mind of an animal, where it's like, okay, how would like a dog think about this? How would like a raven perceive the world? And I just really enjoyed this book. It's really fun and really sweet, not super like fast paced, but thoughtful too. I didn't know anything about Jane Smiley. Apparently she's like a well-known, established writer. I will definitely at some point, I think, read something else that she's written, because I just thought that this book was so much fun. I read it, I think, last spring, maybe it was still winter, and I just remember kind of like tromping around on my walks listening to this. It was just really nice. So highly recommend Persestroika in Paris by Jane Smiley if you're an animal lover or you just like charming books. Okay, number 5. Halfway through, and I'm cheating. Debatably, I am cheating, because number 5 is The Lord of the Rings, which technically is one book, but like also clearly is not. I had both Fellowship of the Ring and Return of the King as 5-star books on my list. I happened to give The Two Towers 4 stars for reasons I'll kind of explain, but I just decided that I didn't want to give Tolkien like 3 separate entries on my top 10, but I also didn't feel like I could choose between The Hobbit and volumes 1 and 3 and just like not include one of them. So here we are. I'm just including this as one entry on the list. Did I cheat? You can let me know what you think. I hadn't read The Lord of the Rings in a very long time, not since high school, at which point I found them very difficult to get through. I reread them this past winter, like near the beginning of the year, and I was much better prepared for them this time around as an adult. Maybe partly because I've since then seen the movies multiple times, as you do. The things that really stood out to me were the parts that aren't in the movies, or at least not the regular cuts. I don't think I've ever seen the extended cuts, which I should at some point. But I really liked the very beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, because I had forgotten how much book there is sort of before the Hobbits meet Strider, and just all the stuff with the Barrow-wights and Tom Bombadil and all that kind of stuff was just like so fresh to me, because it wasn't part of what, you know, you experience in the movies. This is one of the criticisms that people often make of the movies, is that it really divorces the Shire from all the other darkness that's happening in Middle-earth. And I think when you read the books, you really notice how that division is not really quite so stark, because the hobbits encounter a lot more interesting and dangerous stuff closer to home in the books than they do in the movies. Similarly, I really loved the end of Return of the King, specifically the Scouring of the Shire, because again, it really shows that the evil that is out there in the world is going to come and affect your home, your immediate circumstances, your immediate environment, if you don't do something about it. And I just also, like, I'm sure this chapter has been pertinent at many times in many places in terms of history and politics, but I think in our present day with everything that is going on, just go back and read The Scouring of the Shire and think about the way governments are interacting with their citizens in so many places today, and I think it's illuminating. Obviously, Tolkien needs none of my praise. Nothing I'm saying is going to be that new or revolutionary. It's The Lord of the Rings. You can't really go wrong. But I did really enjoy reading this, and I remember when I read it as a high schooler, I think I started when I was like 14 or something like that, I really struggled to get through it. I found like all the descriptive passages really difficult to get through. Now I appreciate them so much more. I just think the whole thing is really beautiful. Still do struggle a little bit with the parts that are just about Frodo and Sam on their journey. Those parts just aren't that much fun or like all that entertaining sometimes, which is why I kind of found The Two Towers to be my least favorite of the series. But curious if you have thoughts about which Lord of the Rings book you think is the best or is your favorite, or which one you think is the weak link comparatively, if you wish to share. So that's number 5. The Lord of the Rings. Number 4 on my list, we're back to another audiobook, which is Girl Waits with Gun by Amy Stewart. I went into it thinking it's a mystery novel, and it kind of is, but like the mystery really is not the focus of the novel at all. But I still think it is immensely worth your time if you are a certain kind of reader that I happen to be. This is about a woman named Constance Kopp and her 2 sisters. They live alone without a man in 1914 New Jersey, I think it is. And they're just sort of barely scraping by, but they're doing okay. They're independent women. And then a car runs into the horse and buggy that they're driving. When they seek payment for the damage that has been done to their buggy, the factory owner who ran into them refuses to pay, and things start to get ugly. And the Kopp sisters have to start learning some more about taking care of themselves. This is like the beginning of a mystery series, so it's not really like a spoiler to say they kind of are going to become detectives of some kind. I haven't read any further in the series because I couldn't find any more audiobooks on Libby in the series, but I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye out for more of the books in this series because I just loved it. The sisters are all very different and very fun, very relatable if maybe you also are a single woman. I enjoyed their like relationships with each other. I enjoyed seeing, you know, their independence, and not that other people don't help them out. There's a sheriff who's like one of the other main characters who like helps them a ton. So it's not to say that like, oh, they do absolutely everything for themselves, but they do a lot. I also found it surprising in a good way because some of the interpersonal relationships in the book don't necessarily go the way that you think they're going to, which I found really refreshing. I don't know if this is a weird comp, but I feel like if you like Ellen Bradley's Flavia de Luce series, then like this might be up your alley. Obviously it's very different because like Constance is a woman who I think is in maybe her 30s, and Flavia de Luce is like an 11-year-old girl, so obviously very different protagonists, one set in the UK, one set in the US, a little bit different time periods, but there's just a vibe, and they're smart women doing things. I think if you like one, you'll probably like the other. So that is Girl Waits with Gun by Amy Stewart. Number 3 on the list is Belcanto. This is my first Ann Patchett, but it will not be my last, presuming I don't die. Belcanto kind of reminds me of like Station 11 and The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel, in that it's one of those books where you just like get into a lot of different characters' heads to see how they're thinking about the situation. This book takes place in an unspecified South American country where terrorists attack a birthday party for a powerful Japanese businessman, at which an opera singer that he's like obsessed with is performing. There just ends up being this prolonged situation where these terrorists are keeping all of the people who are at this party hostage. Ann Patchett just writes really beautifully about what people think about each other and about what's actually important to people and about people discovering what's actually important to them. And she can really turn a phrase. Not that Ann Patchett needs me to tell you that. Yeah, wow. That is Belcanto by Ann Patchett. Highly recommend. What a shock. I highly recommend it. It's on my top 10 list. We're really blowing people's minds here. Book number 2 is another audiobook. It is Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. I listened to A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles last year, loved it, and so I knew this was his other big book. I'm not sure how many he's written altogether, but this was, at the time, the other big one that people talked about, so I knew I wanted to read it, and I think I may have loved it even more than A Gentleman in Moscow. So this is set in 1930s New York, follows a young woman named Katie Content who works as a typist. She and a friend of hers, who is a very larger-than-life character, end up meeting this banker named Tinker Gray, and this sort of sweeps Katie into the upper echelons of New York society, where she doesn't necessarily feel that she belongs. This book feels so much to me like The Great Gatsby if it was set a little later and had a female protagonist instead of Nick, who was more central to the action and more of a full-fledged character in her own right and more telling her own story as opposed to the story of like the larger-than-life people around her. Amor Towles is very like philosophical in his writing. He always tells you so much about like why characters are the way they are. Like you can really like understand what a character's kind of like philosophy of life is. He's very good at describing that kind of thing, but like not in a way where it feels like he's trying really hard to lay that out for you. He'll just tell you the things you need to know to figure that out, and it's so good. I do not know how he does it. I loved Katie, again, kind of like a younger woman on her own. I found her like interesting and inspiring. Just the way that she moves through the world is very interesting. And there are some other characters in the book who are just really great, and some that you end up having like really mixed feelings about. It's just such a real novel. The people in it just feel so real. Kudos to Amor Towles. He's an amazing writer. I did also listen to this year his new book, The Lincoln Highway, which I also really enjoyed. Not as much as Rules of Civility and A Gentleman in Moscow, but also a really good read. So now, the moment you've all been waiting for. If you're still here, congratulations. The number one book. This was a hard decision to make in a lot of ways, but I think I also kind of just knew this was going to be it. Because this is the book that I think I've evangelized about the most this year. I've told the most people to read it, and then some of them have told other people to read it, and that is Dune by Frank Herbert, says the English speaker. I think it's probably like Herbert or something. Is he French? I don't even know. This is a sci-fi classic that I, like a million other people, read this year because of the new movie coming out, which I still haven't seen. But I listened to the audiobook this year, and wow. First of all, major kudos to the people who produced that audiobook because they did it right. It's a cast rather than just one reader. All of the people on the cast are great. There's some music. They make it very distinct when they're reading sort of like the excerpt from other documents that happens at the beginning of each chapter. I just really love the way that they produced that. So it's a really pleasant experience to listen to, and I think I really, like, it's a huge book. I know people who have read it in print this year, and I am very impressed because I think it would have taken me a really long time to get through it if I'd been reading it in print, and I would have been struggling to pronounce, you know, Harkonnen and, you know, Muad'Dib and like all of these terms, which I'm pronouncing the way they did in the audiobook. Don't know necessarily if that's how they're done in the new movie. Guess I'll find out at some point. What a book. Other than Tolkien, like, this is probably the best world building I have ever read in my life in terms of like speculative fiction. Basically, the book follows Paul Atreides, whose father is a duke who rules over a planet, but their family is relocated to rule a different planet called Dune. It's known to be quite a violent and difficult place to live. It's a desert planet, and things get dicey pretty soon after they get there, and Paul has to fight for his own survival while also wrestling with all of the sort of prophecy that surrounds him in terms of his like future leadership. It's such a fascinating book because it has everything in it. Like, there's politics, there's history, there's environmental issues, there's drugs, there's love, there's violence. It's really all in there. There's prophecy and fate and big questions about free will, and like, wow, it is a really, really interesting book. Have been avoiding really like reviews or anything because I haven't seen the movie yet, and it's a story that hasn't been done justice in a movie up to this point, so I'm hoping that it is done well this time around. I watched the old David Lynch version from the 80s, I think, and it's a ridiculous movie. It does not do the book justice at all. I'm glad I watched it, but like, yeah, it would be a very hard book to adapt. So I'll be curious to see how it was done whenever I happen to get around to seeing it. But I am so glad that the movie came out, because that finally like pushed Dune to the top of my list, and it was a great experience. So that is it for my top 10 books of 2021. I read 73 books this year, listened to 50 of those, so this year I hope to do more reading in print. So far, not doing that. But who knows, maybe we'll get there. But very curious to hear in the comments if you want to share about what your favorite reads of the year have been, or if you have read any of these books that I've talked about. Love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, I hope to see you around again.